So everything is working so far, and we implemented adding a new instructor list, but I wanted to make a change before we got too much further. And one thing I noticed was that in my rebuild data, I'm sorry, my rebuild data method in the database, what I'm adding for the instructor list is name and instructors, and I'm not specifying an ID for each instructor list. And there are good points and bad points to that. So what it's going to do if I don't specify under ID is it's automatically going to generate a unique ID for each new document that I add to the collection. And that's just going to be a thing of type object ID, which is distinct. And the advantage of that is that, well, it's arguable that this is an advantage, which I'll come back to, but the advantage is that I could have multiple instructor lists that had the same name. So I could have two CIS 120 instructor lists with different instructors. And I'm going to call that an advantage because it's additional functionality, but really, I think it's a problem. I think it's a problem. It's an inconsistency to have two instructor lists for the same class that have different instructors on them. And I think actually, rather than it being a feature, I think it's a bug to even allow that in the first place. So what I want to do instead is I want to actually say that the key value for each document is going to be the course name. And so I'm going to use that as the ID. So let's take a look at what the impact is. The impact is if I'm running the program as I am now, and I say, add a new instructor list, and I type CIS 120, that works fine. And now if I list all the lists, I see that I actually have two CIS 120s here. So two instructor lists with the same name, but different IDs and different instructors. And then if I go ahead and print the contents of an instructor list and specify CIS 120, well, I get the first one, but not the second one. And at this point, I start to think, well, this was a bad idea, and this is not something I should allow. So I'm going to go ahead and add the ID to my insert one. So under ID here is all instructors. And then I'm going to do the same thing for CIS 120. And if I had added a method to take this dictionary and do the insert rather than calling insert one directly, I could just change that method and save myself from some typing. But this is kind of a throwaway function anyhow, because it's really just sort of hard coded for this one application and is definitely not going to be reusable. So I'm not overly concerned with cleaning it up as much as possible. You have to sort of know where to pick your battles, I think. And one more. It would have, yeah, it would have eliminated the possibility of making a mistake here, though, if I had a separate method that just reused that. So now I'm going to also change this add method that I had. So add instructor list to database is calling insert one on instructor list to dict. So this to dict method that I have on instructor list, I also want to use the name as the ID column in the dictionary. So I'm going to go to my instructor list class, and here's the to dict method, and I'm going to add an ID to the dictionary, which is also going to be self.getName. And right now, that should be everywhere where I'm actually adding instructor lists to the collection. So I should be able to, let me right click on rebuild data and run that. So that remade the database. And now I'm going to go ahead and rerun the program. And let's go ahead and make sure everything works correctly. So to list all the instructor lists, and since I zeroed out the data, I just have the default starter set. And then I'm going to go ahead and print CIS 120. And that still works. So now I'm going to add a new instructor list, and I'll add CIS 234A, and then I'll list, and there's 234A. And then this worked before, but it should cause an error now. So I'm going to add CIS 120, and that should cause an error, and it does. So I get the error, duplicate key error collection, blah. So this is going to prevent me from having two instructor lists with the same name, which I think is a good thing. But I don't think the way I'm handling this situation is good, because at no point should the program actually crash on user input. So what I want to do here in my add method for the interface, where I call add instructor list, I want to make sure that it's not already there first. So add instructor list, I'm prompting for the name of the list, and then I'm making a new one. But before I make a new one here, I want to find whether it exists or not. And I already have instructor list in course instructor UI. So what I can do is basically I'm going to do if. So this is just a regular list, so I want to do for. So for instructor list in course instructors UI dot under course lists, if name is equal to instructor list dot get name, that's an error. So I'm going to print error instructor list and then I'll print the name. Already exists. And then I'm just going to return here. So I'm printing an error message, but I'm not actually causing the program to crash. And then if I do get to this line, that means that it wasn't found. So let me go ahead and run it again and make sure everything works correctly. So we'll list our lists, and then we'll add another list, CIS 120. Error instructor list CIS 120 already exists, so that's good. Then we'll add another one, and I'll do CIS 233J, and that goes through fine.